Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to an iconic episode of The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. And here's your host, Alan Mosley.
Iconic.
Iconic.
That's appropriate for this episode. People don't know why yet.
Yeah, they don't know why.
You know, I had told some people throughout the week that we were about to have a big guest, but I didn't say who.
Yeah.
Because you know, every single time we've ever said, hey, next week we're going to have Joe Bob, then Joe Bob cancels on us.
Yeah, they cancel last minute.
Every single time.
That's right.
Like, you think I'm joking. No, literally every single time.
Yeah, it's the truth. It jinxes it completely.
Well, it sucks because what that does is it means you can't do little advertisements of like, on this week we'll have so-and-so, and this week. Like, you can't do that because if we do that, they'll say, oh, hey, Alan, sorry I can't be there. That's what's going to happen.
It's kind of like Jinx, you got me a Coke. Remember that one? It's like if we say the same thing at the same time, you owe me a Coke?
Yeah.
How many Cokes do I owe you?
I don't know. I could use one right now. I could use the refreshment of whoever sponsors this show.
That's right. I like how you think. That's brilliant.
That's right. There you go. Guys, welcome back to The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. I am your host, and if you want to follow us on social media, you can do so, which is facebook.com/TGS Alan Mosley. Our Twitter is @Alan M. Mosley, but you don't have to do any of that. You just go to our website, which is thegoldstandardpodcast.com.
That's right.
You know, you can also support the show at our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/TGS Alan Mosley, just like our Facebook.
Yep.
Speaking of that, I've got a couple of shout outs to give today.
Sweet.
Some people that support the show. Believe it or not, there are some people who support the show. The first one is actually a couple of guys that just recently started their own show. It's called The Status Quo. Here's their Facebook site right here, facebook.com/Status Quo. It's run by a couple of guys named Nick and Matt. I believe it's Matt. Matt's actually a former soldier. I believe he served in Iraq, and now he's doing his podcast talking about why you shouldn't do that. So don't do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly.
Don't join the military. Don't go to Iraq. Those are pretty good ideas. But you can follow them at The Status Quo. Right here, they've got their most recent episode, which is the Bill of Wrongs, which you can actually find on their Buzzsprout, which is where they host their show. It's buzzsprout.com/ that's a bunch of numbers.
You got a swanky name for that one too. The status quo. The Status Quo.
The Status Quo. That's right. Yeah, it's not the Status Quo. It's the Status Quo by Matt and Nick. They're a couple of regular dudes, a couple of mechanics who do a podcast. They talk about anti-war, pro-liberty. So they're our kind of people.
Awesome.
A pretty intense show. I listened to the most recent where they were talking about kind of the history of the war on terror, which is obviously something near and dear to them.
Yeah.
So it was pretty good. And you can also follow them on Twitter, which is, their Twitter is @QuoStatist.
@QuoStatist.
QUO Statist.
Okay.
@QuoStatist is where you'll find the Status Quo on Twitter.
Out.
So Nick, Matt, there you go.
There you go.
And we'll shout them out again. This isn't the only time. Right. Although this is a hell of an episode for them to get a shout out, by the way. You're going to find out later. Also want to give a shout out to our friends over at The Other 3% on Facebook. Facebook.com, The Other 3%. That's where you'll find their page. Okay. They share lots of awesome content, lots of cool memes, lots of articles about things that we're interested in. They also tend to share this show called The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley, which is why they're great. I mean, when you have as good a taste as that, how can you not get a mention on the program?
That's right.
I actually wanted to show this one thing they had on there right now.
Okay.
Do you remember Eric Swalwell? He's the representative from California we talked about maybe a couple of months ago. He was the guy that said that they should just nuke gun owners and all that stupid.
Geez.
It's that guy. Yeah. By the way, he announced he's running for president too.
Of course he is.
So now I think the Democrats are up to like 19 now with him. So he announced he's running for president. But there's this one particular, the one thing I love that the Other 3% does is that they hashtag all of their articles with "democracy is cancer." Hashtag democracy is cancer. So this guy, this Eric Swalwell guy, this is an article where he's saying that, look, if you want to get these 15 million or whatever assault weapons on the street, just buy them back. That's what you do, just buy them back. That's like, with whose money, Nick?
I know.
Or Eric, yeah.
And if you've ever bought a $1,000 AR-15 and somebody decides to tell you they're going to give you $100 for it, you basically shoot them in the foot.
Yeah, so if you like to be somewhere in between rage and laughter, go check out The Other 3%.
There you go.
Do that. Those are our friends. We love our friends.
Yeah, we have friends, believe it or not.
We have friends, and we love them. So there you go. Guys, we have an epic episode for you today.
Epic.
We have a guest after the break whose wife has a great cookbook.
Yeah, it's an amazing cookbook.
We have a guest after the break who was a doctor.
Really? Mm-hmm. All right.
You don't know who it is yet, do you? Hold on, I'll give you some more clues. Yeah, I know. I know you know. I know I play Dr. Mario. That's not the same kind of doctor as this doctor. We have a guest after the break that is unabashedly anti-war and has his own daily program and his own institute.
Okay.
You know who it is yet?
Figured it out yet?
Yeah. I don't want to spoil it, so I'm just going to use his first name. It's Ron P.
Ron P.
No, that's probably too obvious. It's R. Paul.
R. Paul.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
We will be back with you after the break with Ron Paul.
Have you ever been talking politics with a friend and told, if you don't like it here, you should just move to Somalia?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, from the sandy beaches of Mogadishu, Sherry and I bring you Postcards from Somalia, one of the newer products of Little L Productions, where we take on all of the fallacies of the people who say, if you don't like it, you can just get out. Your ad could be playing right now, reaching thousands of potential customers. Sadly, it's not, but it could be. Find out how to be an advertised sponsor for The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. Email us at tgsalanmosley@gmail.com. Guys, welcome back to the show. Our guest today needs very little introduction. He is the famous husband of Carol Paul, who has the #1 cookbook in America, as well as being a long-serving congressman of Texas, multiple-time presidential candidate, as well as being famous for delivering lots of babies and minds from apathy. He is Dr. Ron Paul. Ron Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Well, we're so happy to have you. I've got a short list of topics for us to discuss today while we've got you. The first one I want to get to really quick is the state of whistleblowers, particularly in the United States, but really the world as well. And I want to start with Julian Assange, who has now been in the Ecuadorian embassy since June 19th, 2012. June 19th, 2012, so almost 7 years.
It's absolutely bizarre how we are telling the truth, and I've made this comment so often that if you tell the truth in an empire, it'll be called treason, and that's essentially it. But this one is even weirder. I mean, he's an Australian citizen who's, as far as I'm concerned, a journalist, and yet we own the world, and we can dictate other people how to run their embassies and how they can arrest people. And I would say this is torture. It's hardly spreading American values. And a lot of people still buy into this stuff, that America exceptionalism is something so perfect that we have a moral obligation to use our physical force and our military to spread it around the world. And if we use Assange as a typical case, I would say we're in bad shape. But he and others have suffered a lot for just telling the truth. And in Washington, it's rarely do you hear the truth. And I was on a program just a little while ago, and I restated my position that no matter when you look at a bill that you're studying, you can be sure the demagogues are using it. The title of a bill is always opposite of what the government's getting ready to do. So they're always planning, to do something else, but they always have to demagogue it, which should be considered a lie. But nevertheless, more people are being aware of this. Definitely, the numbers of Americans who are getting leery of our government and not believing, I think, is very good. But they're too slow for me, because they listen to the propaganda, especially when they go into wars, and then they slowly gain their senses and then become anti-war. Just look how long it took for people to figure out that, that war in Vietnam didn't make any sense. And now they look back in the Middle East, Iraq, what in the world were we doing there? But then again, we have a president that's still aggravating a few countries, maybe with the neocons that are still in Washington. To start another war. At least they have a Cold War going on, but I'm sure they're going to be very happy if they have a hot war. It's good for profits and other things.
Well, you had mentioned right there in the beginning Julian Assange being a citizen of Australia. How much blame do you feel that Australia deserves to take here for not standing up and saying, we're not going to allow one of our citizens to be bullied like this around the globe? I mean, doesn't the buck stop somewhere with them for not stepping forward and saying, we're going to bring him home?
Oh, yeah. As an American citizen and politician, I can't decide that I am going to instruct or enforce and tell the other a moral statement and have an opinion, and I would agree with your opinion. What good are they if they have done nothing whatsoever? But I think that is sort of part of the empire mentality, because they're going to do what we tell them, and they get rewarded for it. We have two policies that we pick from. We tell people what to do. If they listen to us, we give them a lot of money. If they don't, we usually bomb them.
Well, of course, those are the only two possible answers, right? Is giving them lots of money or bombing them. I want to move on really quick to Chelsea Manning, who, of course, had already spent 7 years in prison for refusing to testify against WikiLeaks, and now again has been jailed since March 8th of this year. So I guess a little over a month now that Chelsea Manning has been back in prison. I guess instead of talking necessarily too much about Manning, I kind of want to look at the broader scope of how big of a chilling effect do you think this has on the next potential Assange, Snowden, or Manning?
Well, hopefully it will stimulate people to be honorable and follow through and follow the character of these individuals that are willing to do it. But there's no doubt about it. I hate taxation. I hate the IRS. I hate the income tax. But I have to admit, I'm a little bit cautious. It's a little bit chilling when if you become an individual who brags about it and goes about it, I don't pay my taxes, that's a big step. But no, I think that we have a responsibility, but there is a chilling effect, because people are going to be reluctant. But sometimes there are people who look up to others who stand out against war. And I can remember a long time before ever going to Washington, the few individuals that spoke out against Vietnam War, that impressed me. I thought, boy, now that's character.
Yeah. Now, since we've kind of already moved on to the warfare topic, if we were going to talk about the state of the anti-war movement, not just amongst the people, but specifically in politics, because I think that's where you really see the rubber hitting the road. I mean, how optimistic are you that anti-war policy is going to be popular in the upcoming election cycle?
Well, I work on it, which is not always that easy to defend, that the peace candidate always wins, and that's a relative term. But I think the people want peace, and I think Trump was the peace candidate. What do we have? Hillary? What kind of a record did she have with all that stuff she got into? But and Trump was saying the right things. He says this war was stupid in Iraq, and so he was the peace candidate. Think about back in 1964 with Goldwater. In one film, in one ad, they were able to paint him as the war candidate, and Johnson was the peace candidate. But then before you knew it, Johnson had to give up and not run because he became the war candidate. So no, but the big problem is the challenge, because if you come out as the peace candidate, I think a few people might remember how they treated my view about being anti-war and being the peace candidate. Oh, you're anti-American, you support the enemy, and you don't like the troops, and all these things. So it's the demagogues and the people in charge of the message that is the problem. But I think that we have to be better. I was always hoping the internet would, enlighten more people. So we have to keep trying, but it's alive and well. It's just trying to organize and try to get people to prevent war and design and define policies that prevent war, rather than waiting until the body bags keep coming back. And then they say, oh, well, we better do something about it. So it's a challenge. Around time, it's going to continue to be along, because there's always people who sort of like the issue of war, but it's always couched in patriotism and good terms and taking care of the world and making people happy and peaceful. And the reason we go to the Middle East, believe it or not, they get away with telling us that we have to be there to protect our liberties, to protect our Constitution, protect American exceptionalism. And people want that to be true, but then all of a sudden they wake up. There's too much complacency. But those of us who believe strongly that we shouldn't be involved in these conflicts, we have to do a better job to reach more people.
Well, we had Lou Rockwell on the show just a couple of weeks ago, and one of the candidates that we discussed really briefly was Tulsi Gabbard. Now, I know Tulsi doesn't quite have the economic stances we would like her to have, but she's pretty unabashedly anti-war, especially amongst her contemporaries who are usually pro-empire. And I'm sort of already seeing this unperson effect, right? Where I remember, Dr. Paul, I remember the days that you were running and they would have, if you were polling 20%, they would show a poll on TV, and if you add, your name wouldn't be on the list, and if you add up the numbers, it's missing 20%, and you have to wonder, well, wait a minute, this doesn't add up to 100. This poll can't possibly be right. I feel like you're already seeing that with Mrs. Gabbard, that they'll have a poll on TV and it doesn't add up to 100%, and you realize that missing percent is her percentage that she's polling, because it just goes to show you that it doesn't, of all the different stances that make up domestic policy, foreign policy, if you don't go along with the status quo on that one stance, which is the warfare state, then they will erase you from the bidding. I mean, that's just bizarre, but I feel like we're seeing it happen all over again.
Yeah, you become a non-person, and they don't even like to criticize you, because if you get criticism from the other candidates, that draws our attention. When you think back that the best thing ever in my campaign, Giuliani condemning me for my policy, that woke up a lot of people. So I think the tactic isn't to do that. The tactic is always to make the individual a non-person, and you're pointing out that about Gabbard. That's exactly what they're doing. They're not giving her much credibility. But ideas have consequences. The only thing that counts are ideas. They're very, very powerful, and an idea whose time has come, they cannot be stopped. So I think the policy of peace is always there, and hopefully we can do our part in promoting those individuals who are precepts of what a peaceful foreign policy would be all about. And to me, it's just a wonderful thing, promoting peace and prosperity and trade and travel and solving so many problems. But when people hear it all, I think they're with us. The big job is getting our message out.
Well, I'm reminded, you had mentioned the point that you feel like the peace candidate always wins, and you had mentioned Donald Trump and how he, at the time, candidate Trump was saying the things like, well, Iraq has been a quagmire and Afghanistan and we shouldn't have gone overseas. But I'm reminded of the Tom Woods law, which is no matter who you vote for, you always get John McCain. So I'm afraid that no matter who we vote for, it doesn't take very long before they become a swamp monster.
No, that is the case, and sometimes you'll see a person that you like and think will be sympathetic, and they're moving up the ladder, and they might become a presidential vice president candidate. They move her up, essentially what they did with George H.W. Bush. He moved up. But when that happened back then, there were a lot of individuals that just got very turned off. But the image, the Ronald Reagan image, was such that there was no criticism of it. But it turned out that George H.W. Bush was not exactly a friend of peace, and nor was George W. Bush. They were not friends of peace, and yet they were able to, withstand, get around it because they were seen favorably by the media.
Yeah, well, I'm reminded, I actually saw the video this morning before we got on together. It was an old talk by General Wesley Clark, and in that talk, he was discussing a sit-down that he had with Paul Wolfowitz back in 1991. So, I mean, we're going on almost 20 years now. In that talk back in 91, he was taken aback because Wolfowitz was telling him that the neocon plan to wrap up things in Iraq, to go into Iran, to go into Syria, to go into Libya, those things were discussed decades ago. And of course, we've seen some of those things come to fruition. And so I think it's very chilling and eye-opening for the average American to realize that the military is there's just no way you can describe the military as a force of defense. It's not about national defense. It's about what's the word I'm looking for? About imposing their will around the world. Would you say that that's accurate?
Yeah, there's actually an excuse. So 9/11, and with into the part of 9/11, but 9/11 happened and it had a big impact, but it was used as an excuse. And even the neocons were quoted, this gives us an opportunity,
yes.
and they didn't really go looking for bin Laden. They immediately started wars, They went into Iraq and all these other places and ended up in Afghanistan. But those are excuses. Those aren't real reasons. So yes, it's a very difficult task, and it's a real challenge for us.
Now, something I believe you guys discussed on the Liberty report just yesterday or the day before was the recent news of Donald Trump declaring the Iranian Revolutionary Guard to be a terrorist organization. Is this not a huge red flag that we may be in for more war?
Yes, this is very unique. They've come close to taking small groups in a government and claiming they're a terrorist group. But basically, this isn't done. That we take, the whole army and declare them a terrorist group. That has to be a blatant effort to try to provoke a war with Iran. I mean, just look at what we've done so far. We got out of a treaty that they were obeying, and we have done more to analyze and putting all these sanctions on. And when you look at it objectively of the record for Iran, they're not nearly as bad as some of our closest allies. I mean, where would you rather live? Let's say you had no protectors and you just got flopped into a country like Iran or Saudi Arabia. I think I'd sort of rather be in Iran, even though I know there are problems. But what about contending with the attitude of civil liberties in Saudi Arabia compared to Iran?
Well, I think, of course, the popular economics question is compared to what, right? It's like when you're analyzing anything, you have to say, well, what is that compared to something else? And I feel like that's a question that the average American, definitely the average voter, tends to forget a lot of times, which is that, well, yeah, maybe Iran is not the type of country that I would want to live in, but Iran compared to what? And you already brought up Saudi Arabia, which can kind of segue us really quick into, of course, the crisis in Yemen. I know just recently Congress voted again to send the bill to Trump's desk to try to stop America's involvement with Saudi Arabia as it pertains to the war in Yemen. But I don't know if Trump had already vetoed that, but it looked like he was planning on vetoing it. Again, I'm sorry, I just feel so pessimistic because I feel like you get a candidate that talks the talk, and then when they get into office, they do everything in their power to promote the warfare state.
Yeah, and they're determined too, because when Congress finally wakes up, because the people are waking up, and they make this effort and they pass a token piece of legislation that said you can't do it. This is one little area. Quit helping the Saudis committed the slaughter in Yemen. Let's say that Trump signs it. Mm-hmm. It probably doesn't mean that much because they'll just go quiet. Think about that was all caught and out in the open, and yet it never stopped. They passed laws that said that we can't go into Nicaragua, and yet we still did. We just did it secretly. So the laws get passed. And they shouldn't even have to pass the laws because they have a law, which is the Constitution, and to say that, oh no, how are we going to stop these unconstitutional war? Well, they shouldn't get started. They're not supposed to be started unless Congress originally votes for it. So if they allow it to happen and they finance it, it goes on for years and years, then they say, well, we've changed our mind and we're going to tell the branch to quit. But yet we've condoned the illegalities of the executive branch, so we have the imperial president doing what he wants. So it's a bigger picture, but nevertheless, we have to keep doing it. So when I saw that bill passed in the House and the Senate supporting it, I think that's very, very good at sending a message. But we have to be very much aware of the fact that that doesn't mean we're on our way home and they're going to quit assisting Saudi Arabia.
Well, just one more quick point on that front. Again, when we had Lou Rockwell on the show a couple of weeks ago, he had brought up the interesting point talking about this next election cycle coming up, and you had mentioned supporting the peace candidate. He had said that he actually, of course, Lou Rockwell is very much known for enjoying political theater, and he had brought up the point that Of course, the Democrats look like they're going to be running 16, 18, 20 different people are going to be vying for their nomination. But on the Republican side, it doesn't appear that there's going to be a major challenger to Donald Trump. Do you feel like it's going to stay that way, or do you think there'll be another Republican throw their hat in?
If there's no major changes, I think it'll stay that way. Nobody's going to challenge it. If it is, it's going to be minor because they haven't grown to love Trump. Even the never Trumpers, Republican, they still hate his guts. So they're not going to over. But there could be some major events. It wouldn't take a whole lot that one of these hot spots breaks into open war and conflict. And there's nothing that says that Trump's going to have this guarantee that the economy is going to look as good as it appears right now. But the irony is that economy has to be a lot weaker because all the statistics better than ever, best in the world, low unemployment, isn't this wonderful? But you better print a whole lot more money because we want to get the economy going again. They said they have two positions on that, but I think they know what's on, and that even though there's some of us will talk about the danger in the economy, I think the people who run the show know it as well, so they're preparing for it. So things like that could change the election, but right now I would say if there's nothing major, nobody in the Republican Party will challenge Trump.
Ron Paul, thank you so much for being on the show with us today. Ron, where can everybody follow you in the Liberty Report?
Well, that's the best place to go. Ron Paul, LibertyReport.com. I do a daily program, and when all the equipment's working, which is most of the time, we live stream it at 11 Central. Join us.
Oh, that's excellent. Ron, we're going to get you out of here on this one. Is a hot dog a sandwich?
I never thought about that. Is that the question I have to answer in order to go to Congress? That sounds like a congressional question. That sounds like a question we might hear in our hearing. Well, I'm going to have to study it. I have a committee that studies and looks into these difficult questions, and I'll find out, and I'll get back with you.
Leave it up to us to invite a longtime congressman onto the show, and he gives us a political answer. How about that? Dr. Paul, thank you so much for being with us again.
Very good. Good to talk.
We will see you right after this break. Hey, did you see the playoff games last weekend?
Oh, you're into the sports ball game.
Sports Ball with Mike Meharry and Alan Mosley. SportsBallPodcast.com.
Sports ball is not a libertarian sports show. It's a sports show done by a couple of libertarians.
For when you need your bread and circuses. Your ad could be playing right now, reaching thousands of potential customers. Sadly, it's not, but it could be. Find out how to be an advertised sponsor for The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. Email us at tgsalanmosley@gmail.com. Do you hear that?
Yeah.
Is that pick up in the microphone?
It does. You need an oil can. I'm going to get some WD-40 up in here.
I like that. That's the level of quality that you come to expect from The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley right there. You hear that?
Oh, man.
So, what'd you learn today, Blake?
Well, see, I took this handy old collection
You
of
did.
notes
You took
over
notes.
here so I could follow. Something about Julian Assange and, well, I can't even read my own handwriting. Chelsea Manning is in prison or something like that. Peace
is good.
Peace candidate always wins. I write like a drunk dyslexic doctor. I don't know how I got that way, but, Yeah, anyhow.
I feel like this is more evidence to suggest you don't actually listen to the show.
Well, I was too busy taking notes.
This is. So what you're telling me is you just have an excuse now.
Absolutely.
That's what it is. Well, if you weren't listening to this episode, then I can't help you because I don't think we can do any better than Ron Paul.
No, he was fabulous. It was absolutely wonderful to have him on the show.
That's, guys, you have to real talk for a second because we joke around a lot on this program, but real talk for a second. So, Ron Paul is one of the few people in this world that I would genuinely say is a hero of mine. And if you're wondering, if you're at home right now and you're thinking, man, I want to talk to Ron Paul. How do I do that? How do I get to meet Ron Paul? This is what you do. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. You start a podcast. You spend 2 years cranking out episodes and slowly building up the level of clientele that you bring on the program, and then you start to slowly chip away at Ron Paul's friends until you've had enough of Ron Paul's friends on that you email Ron and you say, I've had all your friends on, you should come on too. And then he says, okay. That's how you do it. So it's a 2-year scheme that involves a studio and cameras and a podcast and iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play.
Right.
And YouTube.
And a huge investment.
Of time and money.
That's right.
And a goat farm. And alpacas. And donkeys. And a llama. And a miniature pig. But the pig's not really a part of the farm. I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah, he's more of an inside guy.
Yeah, he's an inside pig.
Yeah.
And then you get to meet Ron Paul.
That's right.
So there you go.
Man, I love it.
Guys, thank you so much for watching the show. Remember, Facebook.com/TGS Alan Mosley. Twitter's @Alan and Mosley. You don't have to do any of that. Our website's thegoldstandarpodcast.com. And you can support us on Patreon, which is patreon.com/TGS Alan Mosley, along with our good friends such as the other 3% on Facebook. And go check out the Status Quo.
That's right.
And we will see you next week.